Hello, I'm introducing the second podcast for Britain Peers Arts. I'm Lucy Walker, and the conversation today is a further discussion around staging difficult and challenging subject matter on the operatic stage. And today I'm joined by Intimacy Coordinator Ita O'Brien and opera singer Gweneth Rand. I talked a couple of days ago to Lou Platt, who's a wellbeing practitioner, and we're going to also hear about her work as well. We're particularly going to talk about the work of the intimacy coordinator and how that practice has started in operatic productions, and also what that difference, that change has made to the staging and also to the well-being and the looking after of the staff and crew and the performers in operatic productions as well, and how everybody is looked after during this process. So to start with, welcome to you both. Thank you so much for joining me today. And Ita, first of all, I just would love to hear about how you started as an intimacy coordinator, and just basically what the work is.
So first of all, Lucy, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this podcast. I've been invited in to work at the Royal Opera House on an opera with Katie Mitchell Theodora in December this year, and so I partly will speak to some of that work, and that's been an absolute joy and pleasure to be brought in and to support opera. And as you're saying, they're now looking at how we put in place best practice in the creation of an opera. So thank you very much. My journey, I've actually been professional in this industry for 39 years. I started off in training as a ballet dancer. I then ended up working professionally as a musical theatre dancer. I then retrained as an actor at Bristol Vic and worked as an actor for 8 years, and then did the MA in movement studies at Central School of Speech and Drama when my kids were young. Have worked as a movement teacher and a movement director, bringing all of my skills as a mover, as a choreographer, as a dancer, and then as an actor through to teaching movement to actors. And then I started writing my own work. So I put on my own play in 2019, and then I was looking at taking that play further, looking at the dynamic of the perpetrator and the victim. And in that research and development, I was looking at how do I put in place a really robust rehearsal process when asking my actors to explore that kind of dynamic. And I did one round of research and development in August of 2014. And when we were all looking at, so I had a mixture of, male and female actors. We all explored when we were the victim, and we were just looking at catcalling on the street, when we were the victim of experiencing that, and then finding a physical score and putting that into place. And then looking at when we were the perpetrators, when perhaps we were the people who had perhaps overstepped someone's boundaries or taken in some way. And actually that was the challenging day. But in that place of intending to put on best practice, I then was in conversation with one of my practitioners, or head of movement at Mount View, Meredith Dufton, and I was doing a second round of R&D into 2015, and she said to me, "Please, will you come and start teaching what you're developing? Because I have to note all the intimate content in the plays that my second and third year actors are putting on, and invariably the physicality that they're portraying doesn't tell the right storytelling. And when I speak to them about what physicality they do need to be portraying, their eyes glaze over, because there was no professional structure within which to create that in a really safe way." So April 2015, I started teaching the students, and then gradually we got feedback from that year and taught it year after year. And then by 2017, the students were saying to me, "This is brilliant in drama school. What's happening in the industry?" I started speaking to Equity, and they sent me their legal contracts. I shared the work with a group of agents, the Personal Managers Association, in June of 2017, and instantly they were saying, "Oh, yes, we need this," and started telling me all of their horror stories. And then, of course, I was trying to re-speak to Equity, and then Weinstein happened in October 2017, and then with Equity's intention of then writing out their guidelines for safe spaces, they called me in, and then gradually sharing the guidelines, the work then began to be listened to, and then gradually the intimacy onset guidelines that I'd written became endorsed, and then subsequently me actually putting the place the work in practice on set, and subsequently the role of the intimacy practitioner, came about.
Mm-hmm. Wow, yes, I was going to wonder at what point you felt it accelerated, and I assumed it was the Me Too, the Time's Up, around that period, around 2017. We'll talk specifically about opera production shortly, and then we'll bring in Gwen as well. But at what stage in a production of a film production, stage production, do you get brought in to do this work with the cast, with the crew?
So we get brought in at various stages, but best practice is that right from the get-go, the producers and the director are looking through the script, and as they would do with any other physical storytelling content, if there's a dance, they're going to earmark it. Say it's Romeo and Juliet, there's the Capulet ball, they know that they need a choreographer, they'll earmark that, they'll put aside finances. Let's stick with Romeo and Juliet, again, all the fights, they know that they're going to need a fight director. They're going to earmark that. They're going to bring in your fight director to teach all those lovely, beautiful sword skills, and they're going to allow for finances. So now we're saying with any intimate content, it's exactly the same. And that's part of the awareness bringing to the industry, that just as a choreographer is someone who has skills to be able to teach a waltz, teach a tango, and then choreograph with that, telling the right storytelling that serves the production, serves the director's vision. Likewise, a fight director or a stunt coordinator brings skills of teaching how to do sword play, how to do a good fall, teaches those skills to the actor, and then tells the physical storytelling, choreographing that fight, again, that serves the production, serves that director, helping everybody to tell the right physical storytelling. It's the same with the intimate content. It is a body dance. It is a physicality that's pushing the storytelling forward, that's telling something more about the arc of the storytelling, and something about who these characters are and who these characters are in relationship. And that's the shift in the industry going, and you need a practitioner who knows about body skills, who knows about choreography and timing. And then just like a stunt coordinator, inherent with that journey through to tell the best physical storytelling, there is an inherent risk. And the risk with intimate content is when your personal and private intimate body is at play, your any degree of nudity that might be asked, any degree of simulated sexual content, and touch. Everybody has their own journey with their relationship, with nudity, with touch, with what's all right to be performed simulated sexual content wise. We don't need to know what their stories are behind their boundaries around each of those aspects, but we do need to put in place a professional process by where they can call their boundaries. We can ask for their requirements, that's given a professional structure. That's where we put in that risk assessment that puts in place that really good practice. That means that then by the time we come to choreograph, we've checked out with each performer what's personally okay for them. So then artistically we can choreograph with the aspects of their touch, with nudity, with simulated sexual content that is all okay for them, and allows them to be a free and open practitioner to then create the best intimate content that we can do.
Wow, it's one of those things, and this came up a bit when I was talking to Lou Platt the other day, where some perhaps theatre companies, opera companies have said, well, of course this is important. Why hasn't this been, they berate themselves, why hasn't this been in place before? And Gwen, perhaps if I could just bring you in here, in terms of you've been working as a singer for some time. Is this something that opera, say, is catching up with? Is it perhaps a little bit later to this conversation than other forms, or have you noticed a particular acceleration just across the board?
I think that it's been late to the game in the nicest possible way. I remember quite a few years ago, I did a Tosca and I ended up in rehearsal slapping the scarpia because there was no one there and there was no way of stopping him. It was a rehearsal. They told him he had to do this. He did it, but it was far beyond the boundaries that were necessary. And if there had been an intimacy code there, it wouldn't have been an issue. So I think it's something that is definitely needed, because these days, what we see on stage isn't so much the idea of, how shall I put it? It's all more realistic. So therefore, when you get scenes like the possibility of scenes like that within opera or on stage, everything has to be more realistic, which means there are lines and boundaries that people are willing to go past or not. And it has to be dealt with delicately, and it has to be dealt with a responsibility, and there has to be a level of self-care. And guaranteed after Harvey, shall we say, the whole thing progressed so much quicker. And now there are intimacy coaches because they are demanded. If people don't feel safe, or there's the possibility that they don't know what's going to happen, they are necessary within whatever aspect of arts it may be. So I salute you and I thank you, seriously, because you are making our job so much easier. And in that way, we get to play more as well.
This is it. Absolutely. Thank you very much. That goes right to my heart. And and the joyous thing is, people say to me, oh, you're about bringing safety, and that annoys me, because I'm going, you don't say to a stunt coordinator, you're there just to keep people safe. No. Or to the choreographer, Baz Luhrmann's choreographer for the amazing Roxanne in Moulin Rouge, they're there to make a brilliant dance. Likewise, the intimacy practitioner is there to make a brilliant scene that serves a storytelling, that allows everybody to go to the edge of that physical storytelling, that serves the production, that serves the characters. Inherent with that, just as with the techniques of a choreographer, or the techniques put in place and crash mats put in place with the fight director, that it's inherent within the skills of that practitioner to bring in safety, so that again the most exciting fight can be made. And that's what we're doing. And for me, coming from being a dancer and being an actor and then into a movement teacher, I'm interested in making the most exciting work, and inherent within that is safety, because it's now putting in place the professional structure that's inviting consent. And that's so for me, the reason that it hasn't been there before is that one, people were just embarrassed to talk about intimate content openly, professionally. It was the elephant in the room. Oh, there's a kiss coming up. Oh, oh, let's do it without the kiss. Oh, don't kiss. And then, oh, it's the last run through, just kiss, and then also without putting in place a professional process, this confusion that they knew that in every other aspect of an actor or a performer or a singer performing a role, that it is a performance, it's acting. Even if you're singing, it's still an acting job. And it's something that can be rehearsed, and you bring your skills and it's repeated. There was this curious thing of, oh, you two have got the sex scene tomorrow, why don't you two go out for dinner tonight? This confusion with, if someone's got to portray these characters' intimacy and have charisma, that somehow it's got to be real. And that's also an aspect where it's so confused. There's no other place. If someone has to pretend to be a Hamlet, you're not saying you've got to have your father die, and the rest of it. You're acting, and that's so that's a shift as well. One, people are embarrassed to talk about it. Two, this confusion with true charisma, as opposed to really trusting your actor to bring the energy of each character that comes through that intimate content. And then three, just that understanding that, that sense that, of course, we know that people aren't going to walk down the street knowing how to do a brilliant tango. So, of course, you need a practitioner to teach that. Of course, if someone's going to do a brilliant sword play, that, people, again, don't have the skills to be able to pretend to do sword play. Of course, you need someone to teach you that. But with intimate content, well, we're human beings. That's the fundamental of who we are. We are sexual beings, so everybody has sex. So we don't need a practitioner. And that's, again, where is lifting that and going, no, this is a body dance, just the same as a tango or a fight that needs to be choreographed, and also recognizing that within any intimate content, if someone's going to be, the touch, the nudity, the simulated sexual content, there is a risk in that, and that while the inherent injury with intimate content could also be physical, actually, of course, when someone's touched in a way that's not suitable or asked to be naked in a way that's not suitable for them, that injury is not just physical, but emotional and psychological. And that injury actually can have a far more long-lasting impact, and really, really can seriously damage someone's beauty or their artistry and can really stop them from being able to be a free and open artist, and can really damage their creativity. And that's what we want no more.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for that remarkably clear kind of juxtaposition of like the tools of the trade, perhaps the wrong word, but just actually using those examples of actually you need these skills. This is not just something you can just do because you're feeling it or you're instinctive. You have to take care. Gwen, just on the question of, we were talking just before we started recording about operas that deal with difficult subject matter, with traumatic subject matter, and we were talking about this piece 448 Psychosis, which started as a play and then became an opera, which is about trauma, and it's interesting. And it's interesting in operas that feature violent scenes where you also have to sing at the same time, difficult psychological subject matter, then you also have to produce your voice. So you can't, obviously actors do it as well, but those sounds can be more understandable in terms of a normal human range of expression. But opera singing requires something else. So how do you go about keeping your voice safe, let alone as well as your emotional state safe in those sorts of difficult pieces?
I think when you get to a certain level of singing, your technique is solid. You should be able to sing no matter what. Now, the majority of singers are more concentrated on the beauty of, I suppose, beauty of communication, which is, that's what they do. We do it through our voices. However, I think more and more is being asked of singers these days, not just to be opera singers that act a little bit, but actually to be singer actors, which means there is a different intensity of drama, which is very useful and wonderful. It depends how far you are willing to see how much. You have to see what your limits are. I'm particularly lucky, as touch wood, I haven't actually found them yet, which means that I can pretty much sing through any emotion or any idea of trauma. But that doesn't mean that then the drama is neglected. I have a facility now, due to the things that I've done, which means that I can do things that actors normally would do. So I can cry on cue. I can now snot on cue, which is I've leveled up, ladies, let's face it. Which means that I can bring a different intensity and a bigger feeling of reality to a role that other people might not be able to do, which within new opera, because we are telling stories about now, makes it much more prevalent and much more important.
Yes, I was wondering to bring that very point in, which is the kind of the requirements of opera singers to behave, to perform in a more authentic way, even given the unnecessary stylization of the singing voice in these contemporary pieces. So the piece you were recently in, The Blue Woman, which is set very much now, contemporary clothes, with a big point that it's saying to the audience that you are one of us. We're all this woman. This is happening to all of us, and it becomes that kind of that very easy connection, therefore, with the people on the stage. But at the same time, you're being asked to sing quite complex and challenging music with difficult subject matter. How does that experience differ from, say, stagings of earlier works, canonical works, where there's violence in them? And I think opera productions like Theodora are attempting to do it slightly differently now, because you can't just kind of go, oh yeah, and then there's that violence scene. It's got such lovely music. Let's really focus on that, regardless of really what the action is. Gwen, how do you find those stagings of sort of the more historic canonical works are being treated now?
To be honest, it entirely depends on the directors. The directors are the drivers of what the processes are going to be and how far those processes are going to take us. So, for example, with someone like Katie Mitchell, she will make sure that everything is in place so it's as safe as an environment as possible for the actors or singers to be in, for them to be able to then play to their limits. So inherently, it's down to the directors more than us. We can say yay or nay. It doesn't matter much. If there's something that isn't just right, there's always a collaborative process, and they'll figure it out. But it's driven mainly by the director. So it depends what that director's gaze is every single time. And we're living in a world now where there are more powerful female directors, and the female gaze, therefore, is a completely different one from the male one. And that's sometimes where, this is going to get me into such trouble, that's sometimes where intimacy coaches are even more necessary, because sometimes it doesn't occur to a male director that this could be problematic. It's just a case of, let's just get on and do it. Whereas that will leave the female in that particular, it will leave them feeling very vulnerable. They won't be able to work to their true potential because they feel unsafe, or they don't know what's going to happen. If it's planned out by an intimacy coach and a director is on board with having they get so much more out of their actors and singers. It's very, very quickly turned into something that is part of the core of what we need in order for us to do our jobs. So what Ita was saying was completely right. You have, if I have to do a fight, you have a fight director. But what was always lacking was that it was literally a case of the director said, okay, so if you can put your hands on her here, just try not to bruise her, really throw her across the stage. That's what will. It's true though. No, I remember productions where I've come home and the next day I've got bruises on my arms. And I literally will walk in the next day and say, look, look what you did. Maybe you can just fake it a little this time and I'll do the rest. It shouldn't have to work like that. And now, because of directors like Katie, it's driving us forward in a way that is positive, I think.
Yes, Ita, you must have heard stories like that. I guess this is why you're doing what you're doing.
Yes, absolutely. And I would like to say that it's not inherently the role of good women directors. Actually some of the productions I've worked on have been the best, the most beautiful male directors. It's about somebody having the awareness to open it out and to want to work with best practice and to be, and as Gwen was saying, sort of that understanding that, in order to get the best performance, in order to allow your performer to bring the best of their skills to this storytelling, yes, they need to stay open and in free flow. That means they need to feel personally safe, to be open, empowered, autonomous, collective, with their collective creativity, with them, their fellow performer and their director, so that then they can bring all of their artistic skills to this intimate moment or to whatever moment, and particularly if it's something that is a challenging intimate moment, you need to bring you need to slow down the choreography even more. You need, again, sort of like, so the structure is that you're really making sure that every single move is serving the storytelling, the beats of this moment. So that table work, interrogating either what the aria is and what the physical journey is, or, if I'm working on a play, that in pulling apart of the script, and breaking it down into beats, and then making sure that the physicality is choreographed. And as Gwen was saying, nobody should ever be physically hurt in any performance ever. Just as a fight director will bring in those skills, but either I will know to bring in those skills, like someone's going to grab someone's arms, the technique is that the person who's grabbing it just creates a frame. They need to hold tension in their body, so it gives that frame, and it's a person who's being grabbed that actually is controlling the energy, that they then are the ones that can then push into that. So they're the ones that control that energy. And so But that takes practice, because it's going in opposition to actually what the intention is when you get to perform it. So even more, just like any good fight, you know, that those kind of techniques have to be absolutely anchored, done slowly, repeated, so it's in the performer's body memory, so that when you release into the performance, that everybody can feel personally safe, and, as Gwen was saying, bring the best of themselves as a performer to that intimate content.
Just reminded me of another question which is sort of relevant to theatre and to opera production, which is the repetition of the performance night after night during a run. So when you're doing a film, you put it in the can, and that, in a way, that's then done. But the someone's coming with their that day self to the performance that evening. How do you work with that? The fact they have to repeat these difficult acts, these challenging acts.
That's right. So in putting in place agreement and consent and having that as part of the professional process, of course, you know, in a run where you've got many performances, and Gwen in particular, I must imagine, and revisiting a production that you've done at one point, and then you have life experiences, and that, you know, with 448 psychosis, it drops into the body, isn't it? And you come back to it, and you probably refine it in another way and have more understanding. But all of that is, you know, we want that. We want a process that allows you to continue developing, learning, opening it out, bringing in new ideas, while also putting in place agreement and consent. So what gets put in place is just the bog standard practice of a call. And here, of course, you've got your fight call, you've got your dance call, now you have your intimacy call. So and you put it in place at the right amount of time before the half, you know, that's suitable for those performers. And again, that's something that perhaps we can talk about in a minute, the different flow of the journey of putting an opera on, and you know, the journey that an opera singer needs to go through to prepare themselves to be ready to perform. And that's something that I had to consider when working, first of all, on opera, you know, and supporting those guidelines. But so the intimacy call, absolutely important. So you're checking out, how did it go, the last performance, what went well, anything that was concerning. And then you're checking out touch. So you might have had the beautiful big kiss in it, but someone's now developed a cold sore since last night. Not suitable to spread the herpes virus in the professional process. So you might go, not suitable anymore to kiss on the lips. What might you do? Okay. And again, that's what's so exciting. And I promise you, you know, this aspect of a performer feeling frightened to say no. You know, if it says it's a kiss, then that's what you've got to do. But what if you don't feel it's suitable to kiss on the lips? Or like I say you've got a cold sore. What is a core principle? What is that kiss there? Who's doing what to whom? What's the power play? You know, if you're drilling down into all of that, you know, and working creatively, then okay, what different body parts can tell the same story? So perhaps instead of kissing lip to lip, then, you know, the person might be turned and they're kissed down the neck. So you're still getting that intimate content, you're still getting the quality of a kissing, but we've got different body parts in play. It's really exciting. And I promise you, it's trusting that, helping performers to trust their no. And also it works always, because if we're inviting the positive no, yes, so that we can all professionally know that we can trust the yes. So again, it's reversing it. And I promise you, you know, it has been the case that up until now, if an actor says no in any way, shape or form, or a performer, the fear that they're going to be the one that's considered unprofessional or a pain in the arse, or that they're going to lose their job. And so they don't, and then overstep their own boundaries in the desire to seem professional, to say yes, and to seem that you can stay open and creative. Whereas actually what's joyous is we're reversing that, going, no, tell us your boundaries. And in fact, your yes is your yes, your no is your no, and your maybe. What happens to the body in the place of maybe? Instantly you can see, you know, tension. Not sureness, yeah. So again, you can't be free and open as a performer, bringing all of your skills in that place of maybe. So that's also a no.
I was just wanting to ask you, Gwen, as well, that the nightliness of something challenging. Do you have to bring a different something to that as a performer every night?
Well, here's the joy. We don't do it every night. And I thank the Lord that we don't, because that would be difficult. I think there is a way of having pre-performance routines, shall we say, that would include a musical check that would include, if you have any fight scenes, just to quickly mark through them. All those things happen and take time, apart from the fact, depending on what the subject matter is, you have to get yourself into a space where you are then able to do it. Because if I, for example, for Blue Woman and 448, after the first time we did it, it would take me an hour and a half to get into that mind, that place, in order to do the performance. And then it would take an hour and a half afterwards to get out of it. Now it takes 10 minutes because you know the processes and you can keep yourself safer and you know what to do. But it's those kind of routines that you need to make sure that you are where you need to be to start performing when the show starts. I think they're very, very important. I think they're necessary, especially when I say when we're doing contemporary work, because it is so real. It's our lives that we're talking about to a certain extent, and it sometimes can be difficult for people to make it a third-hand experience, but still communicate it to the audience, because if you're in it all the time, it ends up being very, very wearing, and it takes time to recover from. But there is a way to handle that so that you are present and you are playing and you are there, but it doesn't hurt your soul every time. Let's put it that way.
At this point, I'm going to bring in some of the conversation I had with wellbeing practitioner Lou Platt, whose work, as Ita says, dovetails with the work of the intimacy coordinator. Lou Platt uses the term the village to talk about the cast, the crew, the whole production team involved in making an operatic work, a theatrical work. And you have to look after everybody in that village. So here's Lou talking about her work.
So how did I get into this area? So I studied drama and theatre arts. So I was a theatre maker, performer and writer. And then not long after graduating, I then trained to be a drama and movement therapist. And I'm now in my 18th year of clinical practice as being a drama therapist. And I'm also a clinical supervisor. So I trained at the London Centre of Psychodrama to supervise the practice of other counsellors and psychotherapists. Meanwhile, I was still kind of in the theatre world, making some theatre, popping in, doing some dramaturgy with some people. And then in 2012, a local company hit a crisis point, and they were friends of mine, and they asked, "Hey, Lou, could you do some mediation? Could you hold space for us?" And I was like, "Sure." And that's the beginning. That's where it began. I then held space for this company who were friends, as well as making theatre. The work then, I just found myself that people talk to the people. That company said, talk to another artist who was struggling, and they said, "Hey, well, we found these sessions with Lou helpful. Maybe you should have those." And so it built that way. And now 10 years later, there is a company called the Artist Wellbeing Company, and there are 3 of us who work for the company, Nikki Disney and Noelle Adams, who are absolutely amazing practitioners who can hold space for people working in creative industries. And so we work in theatre, dance, TV and film mainly, and opera is our newest adventure. And that in itself is fascinating. Like, when I think, why has opera become after all of these? But I'm sure we'll get into unpicking. Well, I'd like to get into unpicking that maybe with you in our conversation. So yeah, that's the history of the work that we do. And we work from really like independent grassroots small scale studio theatre all the way up to, like, we've supported all the main house shows at Regent's Park Open Air Theatre, which is one of the largest auditoriums in London. And, you know, we work with, you know, small scale independent short films all the way through to A-list big budget movies we're working on at the moment as well. So we, you know, whatever the size, there's still usually the same need within the production.
Yes, goodness, there's got about 1,000 questions sort of emerging just from what you've just been saying. But the first one, before we perhaps get into the need and the kind of scope of it, what you use this phrase "hold space." Is that something that the theatre company that you first worked with that they used with you, or is that a sort of a recognised term? Just can you tell us a little bit about that term?
It's a recognised term in the therapeutic community to hold space for the client, and in this industry, the client is the artist and those that support the artists. So we are called the Artist Wellbeing Company, but we work very systemically. So our gold standard is to provide support to everybody who is involved, no matter what their role is. So whether that's cast, crew, creative team, production, administration, you know, to answer your question, yes, hold space. I think that's what we do. We provide a container for the art to then sit in. There are two strands that we look at. One, so it's subject matter, content. If a show has challenging material in, there is a risk there that will resonate with any personal material, be it current or historic or secondary, of those involved. But I also want to say, as well as there being risk of harm, there is also risk of healing. And that just because there's challenging material, if our job is to enable people to feel confident with the uncomfortable, to step into the arena of that story, and stories are like crystallized happenings of what it is to be human, isn't it? There it's intense. You know, a whole life can happen in 2 hours. So our job is to help those that are involved in it to do that in a way that is well for themselves, that gets into the grit, that gets that steps into the wounding that is within the story, the trauma, the challenge, the tragedy, the comedy, whatever, and do it in a way that is thrilling, exciting, but also that is reflective, self-aware, consensual, enjoyable. You know,
Yeah.
we want people to have fun and feel alive when they make that art. You know, we want people not to feel dead when they do it. Because what is deadness? Deadness is being unconscious, perhaps. When the shadow remains unconscious of processes, that's when we find people acting out. That's when we find dynamics start getting sticky. They start getting hurtful.
It seems to be mirroring, in some sense, the therapeutic process, in that the therapist is required to go into therapy themselves to understand what they might be bringing into the room and unaware, and kind of giving them over to the client. So it sounds like the performers are given some tools as to kind of like, some of your own stuff may arise here, and this, you know, some awareness of that is important.
That is so beautiful. And as I listen to you, I see the words therapy and theatre sitting next to each other, and they're not that different, are they? I mean, the first theatres were built next door to the hospitals in Greece. That's where they were located. because they were seen as a therapeutic endeavor. And if people are making theatre, one could say that they are the therapists for society, right? Art is our therapy, I think. I mean, that's not a definitive definition, but it's what I believe in. So absolutely, the people that make the theatre, should have a sense of self-awareness. That word should sat heavily with me then, because I don't want to tell people what to do. I think that was just a part of me that gets really passionate about it speaking.
Yes, I was going to just, the next point is what kind of support is offered to the artists or the crew and the team?
Yeah, well, I'll talk you through the gold standard. If money wasn't an issue and time wasn't an issue as well, because it is those two, time and money, that usually push our practice outside of the room. So let's say we've got all the time and the money in the world for a production. Well, we'd set up, the production would buy in us, and that is buying in a net. You're buying a net to place underneath everybody who's working on it. And you might not need the net, but if someone's falling, that's a really foolhardy time to go say, hold that, would you? I need to go buy a net. So we place it in no matter what. And it has therapeutic value and impact for the team to know that if they should wobble, they can call one of us confidentially. Nobody else in the team need know that they're contacting us. Have a session with us to pause, reflect, become conscious, reconnect, and find ways of going back into the room that can enable their creativity and joy. We like to start that net happening a week or so before rehearsals start, because there's a lot of anticipatory anxiety then. It is the dream about what is to come that might already start touching the spirit. I'm already reading the libretto. I'm already reading the script. I'm already in it, but I'm not in the room. So gold standard, we've been introduced to everybody in the team. They can come to us then. That on-call service runs through rehearsal into production and then post-production. So let's say we've been there a week or so before, we'd be there a week or so after. Why? That is, the aftermath is usually a busy time for us, because everybody's so in delivery. We never have enough time and money to make the work. It's always very pressured, very stressed. So we're already in our nervous system, which is about doing. Very yang-centric, if we call upon Eastern philosophy. Very staccato in some ways. Get shit done. Once it's finished, and that's the bit where you've had your dinner, it was amazing, you put your knife and fork together, you sit back, and that's when you go, crikey, blimey, now I'm feeling it. Woo, that was a ride. Oh, okay, things are coming up for me now. So we're here, the net extends out so that people can feel that they can have somewhere to just process that. And we think our hypothesis, our theory, which we need to research, we're still kind of working out what it is, I guess, is that this will then affect the culture of opera, because I believe that people, I think that, like I talked about legacy burdens earlier, that if we give space to digestion, integration, process and reflection and de-rolling, we don't carry unconscious, unprocessed dynamics into the next production and act them out there. Because I believe probably productions now are acting out wounds that happened 30 years ago that just haven't yet been met. So that's why we say that. So there's individual on-call service. We also provide group work as well, team support. So we run, so often first day, meet and greet, maybe talk through the production, set, costumes, met each other, and then we'll run a foundation setting session in which we'll talk about things like boundaries, consent, setting up fearless and psychologically safe communities, the use of check-ins and outs. We'll look at work in a trauma responsive way, looking at the nervous system, the use of breath, grounding techniques, and the importance of de-rolling. And we set all that up at the beginning. So we strike that note and it carries through. It is preventative care. And then we can offer sessions maybe midpoint as a reflective session where the collective, the village meets again in a village green and goes, right, how are we doing? And people have to trust that that is time well spent. And that is a fight at the moment. We're not there yet. People are like, no, we've got enough time to do this, Lou. I'm like, well, if you went, I think time would feel different after it. But okay, when you're ready, we're here. Call us in. And then, of course, we can do one at the end where the collective, the village meets and goes, right, how was that? And says goodbye. So, and we can come in if there has been an unexpected crisis. We can hold space. For example, worked on a production where there was a tragic bereavement within the team, and we then, things you cannot predict that is going to shake the village. So we can then be parachuted in and hold space for people to just find their feet again and find their creativity again.
When did opera theatre companies begin to use, so let's say opera specifically, when did they begin to use practitioners such as yourself?
Even intimacy coordinators, I worked with alongside the wonderful Ita O'Brien. She was at the Theodora, and I did some support in conjunction with Ita for some elements of that production. And that seemed a bit groundbreaking when you think about the content of opera stories. My God, it's horrific, isn't it?
Yeah. Almost by definition. Yeah.
But I think there's, I was thinking, you gave me this question and I reflected upon it, and I wondered why opera might be one of the art forms that hasn't included it yet. And I wondered if emotional connection in opera is something that is kept at arm's length because of the nature of the work. I was reflecting upon this with an opera singer not that long ago, and she said, well, one has to keep emotions at bay because it affects the voice.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, okay, of course. And so that left me with a curiosity of what is my role as an artist wellbeing practitioner? There's a duality to it, because at the heart of our practice is about integrating human vulnerability into the work and finding ways of harnessing that vulnerability into creative power. And we do that because I believe that's what the audience will resonate with. That's when going to theatre is like going to church, I think. It's when we are inside it, and it is beyond us as well, when we can feel it. But the other role of us is how to help the performer not be overwhelmed by it, to feel the emotion, to find their sweet spot within them. And I do think opera is changing. The staging of it is changing. And believe me, I am so naive about opera. I've got such fresh eyes to it. The trope is that it's very rigid. The body doesn't move much because the body is the instrument, of course. You wouldn't play a cello and wave it around in the air. You might, if that's the avant-garde kind of cello playing. But I think there is more theatre that's coming into opera now. And so therefore, does that mean more emotionality is coming into opera? And if that is coming into opera, how do we help opera singers to feel confident, to feel like they can feel their emotion and it blend in with their voice rather than overwhelm their voice or block their voice? Like, how can an opera singer be emotional and still be a badass singer?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something I hadn't. It was just sort of teetering on the brink of understanding, I think, and you've just articulated it really well, which is when, particularly in scenes of violence and an opera that's happening at Snape shortly, the Rape of Lucretia features not the actual rape, but certainly the build up to it, and that what is the singer supposed to do to sound authentic and at the same time still use their vocal technique and sing and be distressed. And actually the way it's written is highly stylized and implausible, partly because it was written in 1946, but also partly because it's opera and as you say, all that goes with that. So that but at the same time, the operatic voice is capable of such strength and power, and in a way, working out how you can be vulnerable and your enormous voice reaches the back of the stage at the same time. How are those two things remotely compatible? Must be a really interesting question for anyone approaching it now.
Oh, well, that straight away, this just I heard Brené Brown, the social scientist and storyteller, just resonate in my head, and power of vulnerability. He said, how does the voice be powerful to reach the back of the room? Well, that is, vulnerability can be deeply powerful if we befriend it, and if it is not shamed or abused. And so again, the artist wellbeing practitioner is to come into the room to help people open their eyes up to any abuse of power in the room. And that, unfortunately, is the burden that theatre and opera currently still, the legacy burden. I think in the arts, has been an abuse of power. There have been unhealthy dynamics within rehearsal rooms that I think we're still trying to crack ourselves out of. So we not only tend to the individual, we also tend to the village.
We just heard Lou reflecting on how relatively recently it is that opera has brought in wellbeing practitioners and other similar practitioners into their general practice. Gwen here is reflecting on when there aren't those people available and what happens then.
The first time we did 448, there was no safety net, and we were not told how to get in or out of what we were doing. And it affected a lot of people. It really did. It wasn't, we produced the work, but it wasn't healthy. Not that talking about that subject matter can be a healthy process to that extent. And the second time we did it, the same thing kind of happened. It took people being almost quasi-broken in order for them to realize that something needed to be in place. And then it took, for my personal experience, it also took demands from the production team that were coming in to say, if we're doing this, we need this. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it would be, there are things where they might say, well, we don't really need one. But it's always good to check. It's always good to check. But again, that was however many years ago. Things are hopefully moving forward so that it's just part of a given that it will always be there.
And then just to highlight that that the intimacy onset guidelines and the intimacy practice and the role of the intimacy coordinator, and that's why it's called a coordinator. So just, very often it is called a coach. And Gwen, I noticed you calling it the role of coach, and actually I really push back against that. I feel a coach works one-on-one, whereas our role is absolutely working across the whole arc. We're supporting the producer, we're supporting the director, we're listening to the actor and then checking in with the wardrobe department. And then that's the next bit. This is about a whole production. So of course you're taking care of the person performing it, but you don't know who in the crew, or the wardrobe or the makeup might also be affected by this subject matter. They're having to deal and be present with this subject matter night after night. And that might really not be suitable for somebody in the crew, like be it a crew on the stage crew in a theatre or the crew in a TV or film. And so that's why you're stepping back and looking at, and that's why I say it's the role as a coordinator. We're supporting the producer to put in place best practice across the arc of a whole production. And this has been joyous in our conversations with the stage management at the opera company, is like flagging, say, Rape of Lucretia is coming up. Is there anybody that for whatever reason, it's not suitable for them to be present with that, to engage with that whole production, and so them being, that flagging that in advance. And the opera company, the opera house very often do know what the arc of the subject matters are of the performances are going to be. Like I think they were saying they've got their schedule like for the next 3 years, and so having that awareness to be able to have those conversations with their staff, and then professional and responsible choices made about who is placed on what production, for crew as well as cast. So that again, someone's not been activated night after night, with something and having to suffer that in silence. And again, what we want is, it's really important for these stories to be told. Sadly, our challenging intimate content is very much part of our humanity. That is what it is. Why are we choosing to do it? Why are we choosing to put that storytelling on now? And how are we bringing, a modern, take on what it is we're saying, through this piece and exploring with our audience. So it's not that it should be shirked away from, but it is that we should put in a professional process so that everybody can do it in as much as possible a physical, emotional, psychological, healthy way for everybody on a whole production.
That's really interesting. What the talking specifically about the Rape of Lucretia and the kind of your question almost. Why it's almost, you might think it's just too difficult to put these productions on now because it's difficult. The audiences won't come because it's difficult, and therefore why should we do it? Why upset everybody? But I think you're right. I think absolutely these are important subjects, and it's then the how you look after as best you can the people involved, with the aim to looking after them thoroughly, but also then to have these conversations because they are still important. And it strikes me that I worked for Britten Peers Arts for a number of years, and part of my job was talking about Britain's operas all the time. And I think that only really in recent years you look at Rape of Lucretia and you go, well, hang on a minute, you don't just say it's beautiful, it was written in 1946, it was a chamber opera, it was at Glyndebourne, and all the historical things. There's really big important stuff here, and I can berate myself by thinking, why did I not talk about this in that way before? And now we are, and we're having there's some soul searching taking place, and how do you even write marketing copy for this piece? But it's been very interesting putting it, having these conversations is just, then there's no shame attached to not knowing, and you get it out and you have the conversation.
I think there's something that everyone seems to be forgetting. You talk about opera in these big terms, but essentially it's all human story and human emotion. And that is something where the same subject matter in different forms will come up again and again and again. It might have been set in a different time, but the human state is generally the same. So there will be some kind of trauma within whichever particular opera. It's whether it's addressed or not. It's whether it's made pertinent. That's the difference, I think.
I think one of the other things I'm interested in is the organizational education in terms of the legacy of the work that you do. on a production with a company or with a film crew or with an individual, so that they might, even if in the next production they work on you're not there, or a person like you isn't there, do you feel that is filtering through, so it's a kind of given that performers are looked after in this way? Or is that, are we not there yet?
Yeah, I don't think we're there yet, but well, I think you're kind of like teach a man to fish, and absolutely, you know, I had a thought, I think it was a few months ago, I kind of was like, I strive for this to be best practice and for it to be integrated, and that is what a therapist is doing all the time. All the time I'm working to put myself out of work. And I was like, oh no, in a few years' time, I'm going to have to find a new business, because maybe, and I actually don't think this is realistic, but hopefully people do start working together in a different way, so we aren't needed so much. But actually, I say that, and I don't think therapists will ever be out of work. And I think there is something useful about having the wellbeing practitioner who needs to be a trained counsellor, psychotherapist, drama therapy. Drama therapy is great for this, psychodrama as well. You know, it's because it's complex work. And I go back to you've heard me use the word village. I think every village needs a healer, and that, because I think we can get role conflation and role conflict when because the pastoral care often falls to the producer, stage manager, director, because they're kind of the leaders within it. And when someone, an actor, for example, the director needs to push them as a performer in a direction, but that direction is splintering their personal spirit. The director then has this, if their role is to hold the well-being of that person, they then get splintered and split. So we don't have the role conflict. The director goes, they can see it and go, hey, why don't you have some time with Lou or Nikki or Noelle? And then let's talk. Let's see what we can do. What is the compromise? What's going on for you? So I think having someone that is outside of it, you know, the shaman on the edge of the village with their eccentric ways, they can come and sit in our hut for a bit. And I hope it's okay for me to draw upon that kind of more ancient ways of being.
For me, what's important, just as in, you know, supporting developing, you know, an intimate scene, you know, and sometimes I come in and it's, you know, a director hasn't worked with an intimacy coordinator before, and they're going, well, tell us how it works. And I'm going, it's the other way around. I'm just here to support your process. It starts from the actor performer interrogation of the scene, talking about it, why is it there, and then why are we doing it, what are we trying to say with this moment, and that awareness, and you know, and what each character's bringing to it, what the dynamic is, what you're portraying, you know. And I'm listening to the director's vision, to what the artists are bringing, what those conversations are. I'm also body listening. I'm listening to not just what, you know, the artist is saying, but also the impulses that they have and what they're bringing to it. And that's what I'm going to lift. And and those conversations are absolutely inherent. And also, if an image or a physicality is wanted, that's you know, that's just an image that doesn't really have a purpose in that way. It hasn't done, you know, if it's not able to be answered by why is it there, you know, the director being able to really say, how is it part of the storytelling, you know, the performer's been able to interrogate, what's it saying about my character, what is the want of my character, what's the obstacle, where does that sit in the body, what's that activating, you know, sort of and then therefore then you start to get a basic outline, and then from there then we can take that then as the detail of the scene. You know, if those questions can't be answered, then very quickly it's like, well, there's no place for that in this performance.
I'm getting such a strong sense that despite, and we talked about this morning, Ita, that there's been some pushback in certain quarters against the value of this work, possibly from people who haven't experienced why there might be a need for it in the same way, because of power dynamics, let's say, that they haven't personally felt compromised before. But it's so exciting to hear that this is becoming part of practice, and hopefully will, is becoming more just a given that that's part of the production. Thank you both so much. I think we're sort of drawing to an end here. I found it incredibly educational to hear from you both, from both the sides that are now becoming so sort of healthily intertwined, and it's been fascinating to hear. So thank you very, very much indeed.